Welcome back to BaldHeaded Metal, guys. My name is Joseph. Today, I got a special guest. I did announce this. I'm finally gonna be starting a podcast with a fellow YouTuber and a fellow friend here, Andrew McKay Smith from the Scars and Guitars podcast. You guys should check him out. Awesome interviews with a bunch of different band members with various heavy metal bands. Andrew, this is exciting. We're gonna be starting a podcast together. So for me, it's already exciting. I've been trying to get something like this in the works for quite a while now.
Yes, indeed, mate. And it's what time is it over here for me? 5:30 in the AM for me, 2:30 in the PM for you.
Yeah,
Right across the world. This is the brotherhood and the spirit of heavy metal, isn't it? We both
100%.
grow up, we come from different cultures, different parts of the world, yet we connect and we bond through our shared love and passion of heavy metal. Yes, I host the Scars and Guitars podcast. I have been hosting the podcast now since mid 2017. My first interview that I conducted for the show was with David Vincent from Morbid Angel.
Nice.
Massive Morbid Angel fan, I've got to say, and I was thrilled to get him as my first guest. And it was something that I started not really knowing what beginning. I didn't begin with the end in mind. I just started it and thought this will go wherever it goes.
Yeah, it'd be cool to do.
Well, there you go. And now here I am talking to you. I'm over 600 episodes posted to the podcast. There's about 24 or so YouTube videos, or what would you call them? Video blogs or what have you?
Video blog, yeah.
Yeah, posted. The YouTube thing's only something that I've decided that I wanted to do recently.
It's something
it just
actually
came down to time. Yeah.
Same for both of us, right? We're both relatively new in terms of doing this on YouTube together. I think I have like about 6 months, right? And yeah, I think you're maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I think I started doing it in January, but 1 or 2, and then work and kids and other life commitments sort of get in the way. And then I thought, no, hang on a sec. Especially my Cradle of Filth interview series started to catch on a little bit, and I thought, no, there's something in this. And look, you love seeing when you do these because they're not really interviews, are they? They're conversations.
Conversations, yeah.
You love seeing them catch on, and I like talking to people who leave comments, and overwhelmingly the comments are supportive. I enjoy hearing people's insights and their feedback based on the conversations that I've conducted. And there's no better platform than YouTube for that.
And I would say, in my opinion, at least the couple that I've done and the couple that I've seen from you, is that metal artists are quite friendly in the sense that they could be a quite big band, and they're okay with going down to a channel like ours and chatting with us. No strings attached, no problems at all. They just have fun having conversations, whether it be with fans, whether it be with professionals, journalists. They don't care. They just enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, agreed. It's the egalitarian nature of our genre, I believe. The fact that whether you're a fan in the audience or you're a musician up there on stage, we're all one. We're all part of that same brotherhood and sisterhood, if you like. And that's the thing that I think our genre has. Maybe one of the only other genres that has this might be jazz or something. You know, you go to a jazz club and you can see the fellas and the people up on stage come into the crowd and interact afterwards. But metal is really all about that. It's about, talking to Daz Brooks from Benediction before the show, having a beer with him, and then he comes off and he looks at you and he says, "How was the show?" And he might genuinely mean it. And from our perspective, being able to talk to these people, and for me, being able to have Stuart Anstis from Cradle of Filth, a band I'll talk about a little bit, I suppose, but being an old school fan of the group and talking to Stuart Anstis in one block for 4 hours.
Wow.
Okay. That's the opportunity that we're given here. And provided I think you have that interest and you have deep insight, that the musicians themselves are willing to go with you wherever you want to take them in that conversation.
Yeah. Which actually, the whole thing we want to start this podcast with, right, is not only get to know each other even further, but let people kind of know our backgrounds and where we come from and how we discovered heavy metal. And I was going to ask you, I'll let you start first. What was your introduction into heavy metal, and kind of how did you step into it?
I reckon it was around 1988 or 89 on Australian TV, of course. They used to do advertisements for on commercial TV when you had like 4 channels back then. There was no pay TV or cable TV like you guys had in the US.
Yeah.
And there was this ad that kept playing for Poison's "Open Up and Say Ah." Now, I get it. They're considered an uncool band, but when you're like 8 or 9 or whatever it was back then, seeing that album cover with with the Kiss style thing going on, and if anybody needs to check out that album cover, go and have a look at it. It makes a big impression on a young fella. Made a big impression on a young fella, I've got to say. So, of course, I bugged my mum to go and pick it up for me. So we went to the shops and we bought it, and it pretty much just snowballed from there. But I did a massive detour through Queen and Pink Floyd, who I both love. Came back in through Iron Maiden, Megadeth, and on the side, given it was the early '90s too, there was bands like I'm also a musician, so bands like Faith No More, 24/7 Spies, Living Colour, Primus, Fishbone had an enormous impact on me that way, and of course they've got very heavy elements to them as well. But then something else is looming on the horizon. And I used to read a magazine, which I ended up writing for, the online version of it anyway. Hot Metal. It's an Australian-based publication.
Australian publication.
Yeah. And they had ads in there. They had an ad in there for Legion from Deicide. And
Wow.
I thought, and I remember looking at this photo and it looked like the portal to hell on the album cover. I thought, of course, me being me, I went, I've got to have that. So I went out and bought it, and I'd never heard anything like it. And I think, Poison, all those other bands that I mentioned, they were a gateway. But in terms of when the hooks really sunk in and I went, this is music that I don't understand as a young fella, but I'm going to work to try to understand and continue to listen through. I remember getting Legion, Battles in the North by Immortal. This is OG stuff.
Yeah, this is old school. I love Immortal, one of my favorite bands.
So that's really where it started for me, mate. So how about you?
For me, I'm originally from Russia myself, so it actually started there. And it starts with our father. Our father is a huge, huge music lover. And I mean, he grew up with all the American music that you can think of: blues, jazz, classic rock, all that. So he put us on since we were little kids. So I remember just even as a kid, when MTV actually had music on it, I would just have a stack of cassette tapes, recorded music videos from MTV of like Kiss and Deep Purple and the whole thing. And then slowly, I think when around I was like 4 or 5 years old, my cousins started bringing heavy metal. And I started first getting introduced to things like Metallica, Megadeth, which as for a kid, they weren't extremely heavy, but they were really the first kind of steps for me to step into. ZZ Top, I started remembering, like AC/DC, just all the classics. It's only when my brother, we moved to the United States, and my brother being 6 years older than me, he really started kind of researching heavy metal more and trying to be more methodical about finding new bands, which at that time you had to go to a store, look at covers, maybe look at some magazines, right? Websites weren't a thing yet. And he would introduce me. Everything he would listen to, pass it down to me. Everything he would introduce me, pass it down to me. It's not until I got to high school and late, maybe early college, where I started kind of diving myself and trying to find bands that I enjoyed, not just something that was given to me. But I remember the days listening to Sepultura, like Territory, and to me it was satanic music. And now it's like, it's a good album, but it's not super heavy. But I've never looked back, man. I never looked back from that point on. To this day, I like all genres of music, but heavy metal always stayed at the top for me. It's just, I love the aggressiveness of the music. I like the deeper messages of the music. I like this camaraderie, especially that you feel in concerts when you're moshing, when you're jumping, when you're going crazy. The fact that the musicians are so much warmer than what I've experienced in other genres myself.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that one there. Heavy metal has been like a best friend. It's been something that even when I've spent time away from the genre, because there's been whole blocks of a couple of years even where I was focusing on my career and I just wasn't even bothering to listen to what was new, and I was just sort of focusing on my old favorites like Ozzy Osbourne and Iron Maiden and the like. But I found that when I came back, that love and that passion for it was still there.
Yeah.
And I was still able to dive into it. Particularly that really kicked off for me when I started doing the podcast in 2017 or so. And this whole universe of these new bands on labels such as Nuclear Blast in particular, but Metal Blade, of course, Napalm, all of the labels that are delivering quality metal bands to the people. These days, I was able to have conversations with these musicians, and a lot of them are quite younger than me. I'm 43, so I was talking to some guys and gals that are, in some cases, like New Zealand's Alien Weaponry, in their late teens. So these are they're not kids, they're adults, but these are young men that are born in years that I have a crystal clear memory of, yet here they are crafting dynamic heavy metal influenced by the same people and the same bands that I grew up listening to myself. And that's the remarkable thing, the cyclical nature, I think, of heavy metal is that at any stage, and you see this too, and I know on the podcast I've gone on some bit of, they're not rants, but I've commented on it. See, to me, I remember when Painkiller was released. Okay, I wasn't a huge fan of the band at the time. I got into it later, man. But I remember 1990s magazines. You'd see the ad for Painkiller or what have you. You remember when that was the in-market album. So that I feel like that's kind of my music. And then you go to some of these festivals like Download or whatever it might be, and you see a 15-year-old kid wearing a Painkiller or a Screaming for Vengeance t-shirt. To me, it's like that's great. But there's some killer new bands out there that are actually taking that Painkiller template and they're building on it, such as what Bill Hudson from North Tail is doing. And Bill Hudson's played in a bunch of bands, but a magnificent guitarist. And I just think, so great, support the legacy acts, but metal needs to be kept alive through new artists, reinterpreting the old stuff and putting their own flavor in.
I agree with you. And I've had some conversations where I've asked this question of some bands. I'm like, do you feel the internet is a good thing or a bad thing? And they've all pointed to the same thing. At the end of the day, it's a good thing, because even if there is a lot of competition now, there's so many different bands coming out, there's so much more opportunity for you to spread your message, where before it was cassette tapes. It wasn't popular. It wasn't played on the radio at first, you know. Iron Maiden always makes this kind of claim every time I've seen them in concert. Every single time it's like, hey, the radio never played us in the 80s. They never wanted to give us that. It was because of you guys that we were able to get anywhere and kind of spread our music. But now there's just so much. And they're also now taking, a lot of them are classically trained musicians, combining it with this raw sound of heavy metal. I feel like it's the best time to be a metalhead because there's so much out there. If before you had like 5 bands that you could count on, you know, on one hand that you really, really love, now I'm overloaded with so much good music. Just doing this kind of YouTube channel for the past, 6-7 months, people recommended me so many different bands that I've never heard of: Wolfheart, Insomnium, Amorphous. And I considered myself to be a relatively knowledgeable metalhead. I was like, what? There's like a whole new world that just opened up to me. And I realized how really big this whole thing is.
It's huge. And like I've said earlier, it's a global phenomenon, heavy metal. Jello Biafra said it best. And I don't want to misquote the fella, the lead singer from Dead Kennedys,
Mm-hmm.
But back in the day, he talked about when he was traveling through places like South America and wherever else it might be, culturally very different places to the United States, put it that way. But he'd see young fellas walking around in Morbid Angel t-shirts. And it led him to say, there's a quote somewhere, somebody find it. Anyway, he said something like, no other genre crosses all cultural, religious, social, all of those boundaries that tend to separate human beings. Death metal, extreme metal, heavy metal seems to be the one unifier that seems to cross over all of these things. I've done a music show. I do one every month, but I get so much stuff sent to me. I get music sent to me from Saudi Arabia, like death metal bands from Saudi Arabia. We're talking this whole thing is a global phenomenon, and there's a proof. Power metal bands from Bangladesh. This is something
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many killer bands out there. The only downside is there are so many great bands. How can one person get their head around all of the great music that's happening out there unless you dedicate like hours and hours to listening to bands and letting it is a bit overload. So I think I'd absolutely agree with you that the internet's been an overwhelmingly positive force. But I also remember when I was a kid, when there was a big lead up to an album launch, such as the Great Southern Trendkill from Pantera. And then you finally got that in your hand and you listened to it for 6 months straight. And that was about the only thing you listened to.
Yeah.
And there was something special about that because those albums then become part of your musical DNA.
I 100% agree with that. And there's now even what I also like actually about today's, I would say, period is, and it's more so than it was in the past, is there's so many bands that have a resurgence. Exodus 2014, right, with Temple of the Damned, big resurgence. If anything, they only got better, right? And then there was Overkill. They had like a period where they were kind of just a little bit stale, and then they just resurgence. Annihilated, I remember they came out with their 2010 album. I remember, again, came came out of two albums they created back in the 80s. They come out in 2000s, come out. I think it's a good era too, because now people can rediscover some of these bands. What I do for myself personally is I don't worry about trying to get everything. And for example, this year, I was recommended Bellacore. My mind is blown how good that band is. I could not, for example, Coherence, until I hear Persona Non Grata. I don't know. I know you had a chance to hear it. I'm so fucking jealous, man. But as of now, Coherence is my top album of the year. That's how much I like Bellacore. From the onset, I just automatically connected with it. And I don't worry about like getting every single band, because it's too many. It's just too much. But it's just a great thing. It's a great feeling to have so much now.
I remember back in the day thinking that there was no way bands like Exodus could be doing what they're doing, yet alone at the level that they're doing it when they're well into their late 50s, and I think in some cases even in their 60s.
Yeah.
Yet Persona Non Grata is easily one of the albums of the year, by the way, in my opinion.
Wow.
And Steve has never sounded better. I've heard some comments online, people, he's got political opinions that differ from other people's. Those people, they try to attack the individual rather than focus on what he's actually doing from a songcraft perspective and his vocal delivery. And mate, he has never sounded better. And I challenge anybody out there to tell me otherwise. Okay, because of course we've got modern recording techniques these days, but also Steve's very happy and comfortable in his own skin, clearly. And that comes through. And look, if there's a better shred master out there than Gary Holt, please tell me. Because that fella, it's just riff after riff after riff on Persona Non Grata. So, I mean, I feel like it almost sets up Exodus for the next 20 years if they can manage it.
I've heard a lot of people talk shit about Atrocity Exhibition B as being a little long-winded with their songs. And I consider Exodus probably my favorite thrash metal, one of my favorite bands of top 3 favorite band of all time. I liked all those albums, and I think it kind of blows my mind when people tell me that Gary Holt can't write songs. They're like, what? So what are you talking about? Yeah. I do think Atrocity Exhibition B was a little bit long-winded. Yeah, sure. Just like Injustice for All was, every single song in that album was just a little too long, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't detract it from being a good album. And I agree with you, Zetro sounds amazing. I got into the era of 2007. That's why I discovered them. And I was in the era of Rob Dukes. So for some reason, I have a preference for Rob Dukes, but I love Zetro just as much.
I made that point when I spoke to Gary. I said, gosh, you were nailing it with Rob. It's out there for anybody who wants to find out what happened with the band. I don't think it's a bad thing, but people seem to have differences of opinions and they split apart. That happens. But I think what I said was Rob was fantastic for the band, but I think Steve is the singer for Exodus.
I agree with that.
I mean, a lot of people think Paul, go back to the very beginning, Bonded by Blood. God rest his soul. He's not with us anymore, but he was a bit of a out of control freight train and very difficult to sort of, bands are like families, and you've got to go on the road and you've got to sort of keep your shit together and the like. And I think Paul was one of those louder than life type characters. And people forget Steve was the original singer in Testament when they were called Legacy.
That I didn't know. It was before Chuck Billy, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I think, we only know what we can read on the internet, of course, but I think Steve sponsored Chuck into the band, into what the band that eventually became Testament. So Steve's got a very storied history with thrash metal. He's not like, this thing where like Jason Newsted was called the new guy constantly. Yeah. Rob doesn't suffer that fate, but I think people get this idea that Paul's great. There's nothing negative to say about Paul in Exodus, but Steve really is the voice of Exodus, in my opinion.
I agree. It's the same thing with, for example, Bruce Dickinson. I never liked the first vocalist from Iron Maiden personally. Not a fan of Blaze Bayley. I think Blaze Bayley is a good vocalist, good singer. No, I don't like his style in Iron Maiden. I like him in his solo projects. I thought he was great, but I never liked him in Iron Maiden.
I'm with you 100% on first of all your comments there about oh gosh almighty, Paul Di'Anno. Paul Di'Anno. I've had people argue with me online, and not that I've argued back, by the way, but some of the comments that I've made on the podcast. Um, and they've left a comment on socials or on YouTube or what have you. But yeah, I don't get the Paul Di'Anno thing. He's a punk guy. Iron Maiden are a metal band. And it wasn't until Bruce came along that they were able to launch into the stratosphere. Now, about Blaze, right singer, wrong time. I mean, for starters, from a musician's perspective, I understand they didn't tune down a step, which they really needed to do for Blaze's more bluesy style voice.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Two things. I don't know why the decision was made to bring a guy like Blaze in, who was just completely unsuited vocally to the vocal acrobatics required to be Maiden's frontman, and even his stance. You know, Blaze is like this. He's more like a thrash metal frontman in some ways. You know, he's got this bluesy voice with a thrash metal presence, and it was a very strange time. I remember that clear as a bell. I remember looking forward to Virtual 11, buying that, and then I got it and thinking, what the hell is this?
You know who I did enjoy for the small time he was there? Ripper Owens in Judas Priest.
Magnificent singer. Yeah, he was definitely the right guy for them.
I feel so bad for him. He's just been thrown into bands like Iced Earth, right? Judas Priest, in and out of bands, never been a consistent guy in one particular band. I always felt bad for him.
He's recent, and he probably does do a bit too much, to be honest, but you know, everybody's got to turn a quid, so be it. But his work in what will be my album of the year, I've got to say now, given it's 18th of November, I just can't see any album coming along and besting it, but the Leviathan Project album. And he's the singer on that. Now, it is a bit of a session gig, but if anybody wants to hear Ripper at his absolute best, that's Exhibit A. And I actually think, hey, controversial opinion here, I actually think he's a better singer overall than the voice of metal himself. You know,
Ooh.
And I know I was going to cause controversy, but I loved him. I loved him. I've got to tell you. And like, I love Rob too. Okay. I love Rob's solo albums, but I in particular think it right now. And I mean, it's probably, you know, it makes sense. Rob's getting on in years. So you lose some of your ability on the vocal front there, but Tim is just knocking it out of the park these days. So hold the hate mail.
Well, I know people got upset when I did a review of Senjutsu from Iron Maiden. I said, Bruce Dickinson, you can tell he's getting older. You know, you can tell it's wearing on him because he doesn't sound the same. And people are like, no, he sounds the same. I'm like, have you seen him live? He gets winded quicker. And it's okay. I still love him just as much. I still want him to be the singer of Iron Maiden. I don't expect them to break new ground anymore. And people expect these guys who've been around in the business for 40 years to break. It's not their job to break ground anymore. It's for the young guys to do that, for them to innovate and do something different. And that's, you know, you get what you love from the old school bands. I'm surprised that Exodus or Overkill's amazing live. Every time I've seen him, I'm surprised how much energy and anger they still have in the music when they produce it. It's so surprising to hear.
Well, Blitz is a tremendous human being as well. I've got to say, I think he's the second ever interview that I did ever for my podcast. This is even before my podcast venture when I was just writing, and he was so accommodating as a fella. And yeah, to your point, I mean, he's got the you know, working class Irish and Italian roots that I think that he's got there. And I mean, he's just all about bringing it and making sure that he leaves nothing on the table when he gets 100%. Up there on stage.
I got a black eye at an Overkill concert. I had a curse when I started going to the mosh pits. Is that I had to happen every single time I go into a mosh pit. I have to get punched in the face. If it didn't happen, something went wrong. And for like a year straight, I just kept getting it. I'm like, fuck, man.
What, accidental punches to the face and elbows or on purpose?
Well, I mean, in a mosh pit, can you tell?
That's a good point. Yeah, it's been years for me. I can tell you the last time I was in one was 2005 at Megadeth when they toured, and I was much fitter back then, and I survived. But I think if I went into them these days, yeah, I'd get a black eye just because I'd be. It feels like a washing machine to me. You're in like this washing machine thing, and you're getting pushed around. And as I say, I'm not saying I'm old because I'm not old, but I just get to a point now where I think I appreciate it from a different vantage point, with a beer in hand, checking the band out, grooving along.
You know what I want to do with you? 100%. We're going to do this for a future episode. We should talk about our top albums of the year. I think that'll be really fun. So we can see the differences and if we place any of the same albums on the same list. It'll be really interesting to kind of discuss that, because I'm starting to get a sense that we like some of the same bands, but we do have very different tastes.
I
So
think
it's
so,
like
but I think that's a great thing, because if
it's a
we both
beautiful
liked
thing.
exactly the same thing, we'd be agreeing on everything, and there'd be nothing to talk about. You know, I mean, I've already said
100%.
that I prefer Tim Ripper Owens to Rob Halford, and I know people are going to disagree with that, and you know what, that's fine, that's cool, because that's what these are the sort of conversations that to people who don't follow heavy metal are redundant and pointless, but to us, they add character, they add weight to the music that we love to listen to.
100%. I have this thing where even with my brother who got me into heavy metal, we often disagree on albums, which one's the best, which one's the worst. And I've noticed when I'm doing reactions, because most of the time when I'm doing a reaction, the fans of that band come on there. And I make it a point, we talked about this together before off camera, I make it a point to say what I feel. I try to be respectful. Like, I'm not going to go, this band is shit, get the fuck out of here. I'm never going to do that. But at the very least, I'm like, I'm not feeling this. This is not my style. I don't like it. Or I go, it sounds a little simplistic to me. And a lot of fans get really passionate and emotional about what you say, and they don't realize it's just a person's opinion. Let's have a conversation. Why do you feel that way? If you feel? Why do you think this particular band is as good as you think they are? I remember I did a reaction to this band called Love Bites. It's a Japanese band
Yeah.
in the vein of like Judas Priest, right? And I said, somebody in the comments said, "Oh, this is the best band I've heard in 30 years." I'm like, 30 years? The best band in 30. It's like, you know how many bands we had in the past 30 years, including the rock and heavy metal genre? And you just automatically, so going to say so you can say you like it the most. For me, that's a different story. But to arbitrarily just put them on this list, I just started protesting. And man, did like people just in waves came at me. And I realized to like, okay, I have to stand my ground. Just be respectful. It's like something I've realized, because people get really passionate in the metal community,
Yeah.
especially nowadays.
Yeah, I think some people are going to calm the hell down. You know that. Like, I mean, we're allowed to have it. We're the ones with the channel. We're the ones that are allowed to have an opinion. You can respond to that in the comment section or thereabouts. But please, nobody get butthurt because we have an opinion that you disagree with. Okay,
Yeah.
let's all be mature and responsible adults and recognize that yes, we love the music, and we are going to have differences of opinion, and they're not worth calling us silly names over.
Exactly. And you know what the funny thing was? The people who were patient with me, they kept showing me different songs so I can discover this band. And in the end, I ended up loving the band.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, Love
that's all
Bites
it
are a
took.
good band, but they're not the best band of the last 30 years. I can absolutely agree with you on that. Like, I don't know where, I think Saki, I spoke to a Japanese guitarist, a young lady. She might be the lead guitarist in that band, or it might be another band over there. But Japan has got so many of those bands that sound
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. It's like power metal, traditional heavy metal heaven over there, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And I've recently discovered this band, Bandmade, from a recommendation. And they're just every single song, it's bluesy, it's metal, it's rock, and they just play around so much more. I heard that. I'm like, guys, this is a contender. Like, I can understand this because there's just so much going on. There's so much flavor in the music. But then again, it's what we talked about. It's a preference thing, and that's what it comes down to. It's
Yeah.
what you might like, I might dislike. You might call one album shit. I might say it's my favorite album. I know you said Impact is Imminent from Exodus is one of your favorite albums, right?
Look,
Or
it's
is
a
it?
great album. There you go. That's a great album. I just think the
Don't
recent one,
like it at
Persona non
all.
grata. Oh, is that right?
Don't like it at all. Nope. For me, it's like from
There
the
you go.
old school days. I like Fabulous Disaster. I like Bonded by Blood. I don't like Force of Habit. I don't like Impact is Imminent. Just
Well, Force of Habit's a killer album. Yeah, I think, but look, that's the era that I came into it. So it's not
okay.
my era. It's just the era that I started, and that was the in-market album at the time, given it was 92 or 93 or whatever the year it was. But that's what happens, isn't it? Because then your memories of your adolescence and you're growing up tend to get associated with these albums. Like, hey, look, I don't like Metallica these days. I won't listen to them, won't watch them, etc. But Master of Puppets, I listened to that album for about 2 years straight.
Of
Okay, so it
course.
has a very special place in my heart. Before playing football, I used to listen to it, or what have you, or going to sport, because I went to a boarding school, so had to play sport all year round, and that was psych art music alongside of Faith No More's Angel Dust. You know,
And you did mention that you're a musician. What, you also play heavy metal?
no, quite the
No.
opposite. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever played heavy metal. It's just been, I think fate determines our destiny in many instances, and as a musician, that has certainly determined mine, because I found, look at me, I don't exactly look like your traditional heavy metal fan for a start. So I do agree that when you're playing heavy metal bands, you probably need to adopt a certain image. I just don't do that. I've never been about. For me, it would feel like adopting a caricature. So I
Yeah,
can't.
yeah, yeah.
I used to have long hair for a couple of years, 20 years ago, whatever. But I just found that I didn't get along with a lot of the people in the metal bands as well. That was another thing. Big fan, but just the musician side of it, I just found I didn't graft. And then I started playing covers and playing, if you got Kylie Minogue in the States and Olivia Newton-John and ABBA, all this sort of stuff. But I was
ABBA, yeah.
playing in front of 200 and 300 people. And you can put a lot of groove into it. So I'm all about the groove when it comes to playing bass and really getting behind the music, underneath the music. So I think I come at it from a very different perspective as a musician than I do as a music fan. Yeah.
That's why I find it funny when people make fun of, like, Justin Bieber came out and is like, oh, I like Dark Funeral. And even Dark Funeral themselves made fun of him. I'm like, why? He likes the
Yeah, I
band.
agree.
So what if he does pop? Who gives a shit? He likes Dark Funeral. Dark Funeral is a great band. There you go. It's like I sometimes, there is one thing I never liked about heavy metal. There's a elitist mentality sometimes. That's less so now, I think. But definitely in the 80s, it's like, oh, if you don't listen to Venom, you're not a real metalhead. You go listen to Poison. Go listen to Motley Crue. Well,
Yeah.
fuck it. Motley Crue is good music too. If you like that kind of stuff, I prefer something heavier. And that elitist kind of mentality, that's what is something I've never liked. I actually like that it kind of disappeared nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And when you talk to the guys in Venom, as I have, they couldn't care less about that attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just about playing music for the people. We work hard, long day jobs. Maybe we've got kids, mortgages, rent, car payments, the whole lot. Got to put food on the table. The last thing that they're concerned about is playing up to some elitist tag when they've got paying punters in the audience that are just there to celebrate the great music that they've been
100%.
releasing for so long. And yeah, that whole elitist thing is just, it's sort of confined to very, cobweb filled corners of the internet these days, the old school black metal fans. And I
Yeah,
find
yeah.
they weren't even around back then. They were talking about 20-year-olds that are sort of, have got this adopted view of what it was like back then. I mean, I remember when Satyricon came out with Nemesis Divina, as I say, and In the Nightside Eclipse. I remember when these albums were the in-market album, okay? And it was something, but we were curious. I mean, people like myself were like, what the hell is this,
Yeah.
and what is going on here? It was something that you sort of struggle to understand at first. And the more you listen to it, the more the different layers and textures of the music. And that goes back to, a lot of those bands sounded, not those two bands, but a lot of the other black metal bands like Mayhem sounded the way they did back in the day for budget reasons. They just didn't have the money. So that's why the guitars sounded like Angry Bees in a honey jar. And the drums sounded like it was a cardboard box. It wasn't really supposed to be an aesthetic that was then broadly adopted, but it has been, hasn't it? So I think that underground mentality sort of springs from there. And I can accept it and understand it from a perspective, except for when it's, that whole you're a poser thing comes out. It's like, for God's sakes, life is long. We're all human. We're all just here to get through life. And if we love the music, that's what counts.
And I do have to wrap up a little bit soon, but I want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
From your experience and your kind of, I've said this a couple of times and I've gotten some very negative comments for this, is how do you feel about bands that just don't get out of character? I've seen a couple of bands myself, like Absu, great band. But this guy just stays in character with his deep growls, and I just start laughing in the audience. I was in the audience literally laughing. I'm like, dude, be a fucking human being. Relax. Like, have you found it funny yourself, or you get into the whole character when they get into that kind of character, the deep thing that they do, especially like Nergal from Behemoth? He's really theatrical. Like from his perspective, I like it. I like his theatrics. But from different perspectives, there's some of them just take it way too seriously, and they think they're like this like occult figure.
Yeah, definitely more a fan of the way David Vincent carries himself, or the way George Fisher from Cannibal Corpse carries himself. By all means, sing with that, do that. But then between the songs, just talk to us like we're human, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
I understand that there's a bit of method acting going on. I understand that. And some fans actually like and appreciate that. And like, say, for example, I remember one of the first gigs I took my now wife to, we've been together for about 15 years, was Christian, the great Brazilian Bringers of War.
I love that band.
How great are they? And it was in a small club in Brisbane in Rosie's Live, which is now no longer, but a little underground place, probably about 70 or 80 of us in the audience, that sort of a thing. And he was doing that thing between the songs when he's talking to people. And people were yelling back at him in that, saying, thank you very much, Brisbane. And people in the audience are going, you're welcome. So it was kind of like a bit of an exchange. When it gets to that level, I'm a fan. But generally speaking, I'm with you, mate. I think just be you. Just talk to us as an audience because we'd love to hear from you.
Or I've had an instance with John Schaefer from Iced Earth. He had this side project called Sons of Liberty, and he would come out before Iced Earth to do that whole thing. And I believe for the 50 minutes that he was playing, half an hour of that, he was talking about various conspiracies in the United States and how somebody's trying to do this or that. And, I get it, you have your point of view, but at some point, literally people in the concert were like, shut up and play a song already, because nobody cared. It's like, we come from music first. So that's what I mean also in that seriousness. It's good to have serious lyrics. It's good to have a point and say something that's serious, but at the same time, it's like know when to back off and just relax. Make sure at the end of the day, we're trying to escape, right? It's an escapism and having some fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never been a fan of music. Like, by all means, in interviews, okay, that's your opportunity to explore different themes and topics. Absolutely, think because I do that a lot, and I 100% believe in that. When you're up there on stage, though, and you've got people that are paid to come and watch you, all of that conspiracy theory stuff and all the rest of it, that can just take a fucking seat as far as I'm concerned. People are there because they love you because of your music, okay? And you're going to, a lot of the bands I love, have different political opinions to me. Great. You know what? It means we can still connect over the music, and that's the power of heavy metal.
100% agree with you, man. And if you don't mind, we're going to wrap it up just for today. But, man, this is going to be fun. We're going to come up with various topics kind of each week that we can talk about. And if you guys have any suggestions for topics, let us know down below in the comments, something you would want us to talk about together. Like I mentioned to you before, it'd be really awesome to do like albums of the year comparisons going on there. Andrew,
look forward to it.
A pleasure for the first episode, man.
Thank you, brother. I've enjoyed it immensely, and thanks very much for the invitation.
You're having a good rest of the for you it's morning. No.
Yeah, it is 7:06 in the morning. Yeah, it's all good. I've got the day ahead. What a great way to start the day.
Exactly, man. Enjoy your Thursday, man.
Thanks, brother. No worries.
Okay, man.
Okay, catch ya.